The Space Adventures of Kael Raven. Story 1, The Boy from Duskara. Please like and subscribe if you like the story and follow the fantastic space adventures of Kael Raven as he grown into the legend the entire universe will know. They will ask, one day, where it began. They will point to the battles, to the treaties, to the moment the sky above Valhari Prime turned gold and then went dark, and then turned gold again. They will argue about dates and turning points and the exact sequence of events that changed everything. They will be wrong. It began on a farm. On a forgotten planet at the cold edge of a forgotten system, in a farmhouse built with bare hands by a man who asked for nothing from the universe except a fair chance and enough rain. It began there, in the dark, during a storm, when a child opened his eyes for the first time. His eyes were green. The color of lightning. The color of something that had not yet decided what it was. His name was Kael Raven. And the universe, whether it knew it or not, had been waiting for him. Duskara sat at the cold outer edge of the Valhari system, just far enough from its pale sun that warmth was something you had to earn. Not beg for, not wish for, earn. With your hands. With your back. With the particular stubbornness of a person who has decided that this place, difficult as it is going to be home, and that they will bend themselves to its demands before they ask it to bend to theirs. The sky above Duskara was its most immediately striking feature. It was perpetually dark, not the peaceful dark of night, not the rich navy of evening, but something deeper and more permanent than either. A bruised, heavy purple that sat above the planet at all hours like a held breath, like a sky that had witnessed something catastrophic a very long time ago and had never entirely recovered. Even at midday, when Duskara's pale sun climbed to its modest apex and did its honest best, the light it provided was thin and cold and silver, the kind of light that illuminated without warming, that showed you everything clearly and made none of it comfortable. 2 small moons attended this sky. They were not magnificent moons, not the dramatic, enormous satellites of more favored planets. They were pale and unremarkable and permanent, hanging above the horizon at all hours in slightly different positions, like 2 quiet witnesses who had decided a very long time ago that this was their post and they intended to keep it. The settlers of Duskara had named them, over the generations, Born in Ash. Neither name was particularly inspired. Neither moon was particularly inspiring. But they were reliable, which on Duskara counted for a great deal. What the sky lacked in warmth, the land made up for in savage, breathtaking beauty. Stand at dawn on the high ridge above the Raven farm, if you could tolerate the cold long enough to make the climb, and look south. What you would see would stop you where you stood. The Duskara jungle began perhaps 2 kilometers from the farm's southern boundary and continued, without interruption, for as far as any instrument could measure. It was not a jungle like the warm, humid tangles of more temperate worlds. It was something altogether stranger and more magnificent. The trees were enormous, the oldest of them 50 meters tall or more, their trunks as wide as houses, their bark the deep, lustrous black of charcoal left in rain. They grew close together, their canopies interlocking into a vast, unbroken ceiling of green and violet, deep emerald leaves the size of doors mixed with sprawling fans of deep purple frond that caught the silver light and scattered it in fragments. Luminescent organisms, not vines exactly, more like living threads of bioluminescence, wound between the trunks at every level, pulsing with a slow, soft light that in the pre-dawn appeared to make the jungle breathe. As if the whole vast thing were a single organism, drawing slow breaths, exhaling light. From the ridge it was heartbreaking in its beauty. Closer in, it was something else. Every farmer on Duskara understood the jungle's fundamental nature from the first season. It did not acknowledge them. It did not threaten them, exactly. It simply continued being what it had always been, vast and complete and indifferent, and whatever happened to anyone who entered it unwisely was of no more concern to the jungle than the fate of a stone dropped into deep water is of concern to the ocean. The jungle had been here before the settlers. It would be here after them. It extended this information as neither threat nor comfort, simply as fact. The predators were real and varied and efficient. The Shade Stalker was among the best known, lean, black-skinned, utterly silent, an ambush hunter of extraordinary patience and speed. Deeper in lived things that the older settlers spoke of in careful voices and did not describe in detail to children, creatures large enough that their passage through the undergrowth could be heard from the farm boundary, creatures that had never been formally catalogued because formal catalogers had not gone deep enough to find them and return with the information intact. The root systems were perhaps the more persistent enemy. Each season, the jungle's outer edge advanced. Slowly, a meter here, half a meter there, but relentlessly. Farmland that had been cleared with weeks of brutal labor would show new roots threading through the soil within a single growing season. Fencing required constant maintenance. Cleared ground, left unattended for a full Duskaran year, would begin the process of reclamation, the jungle reasserting its claim with the patient certainty of something that has all the time in the universe and knows it. The temperature was the third adversary. Duskara's days were cold. Its nights were colder. The deep cold came fast. Settlers learned quickly that being caught in the open after the second moon rose was not a mistake you made twice, because sometimes you did not get the opportunity to make it twice. The farmhouses were built low and thick-walled, with heat retention as the primary architectural priority, beauty and light a distant afterthought. Why did people come here, then? Why settle this cold, dark, dangerous planet at the edge of a system nobody in the wider galaxy paid any attention to? For the same reason people have always settled difficult places. Because it was available. Because the land grant was cheap. Because somewhere in the specific hardship of a place like Duskara was a version of freedom that more comfortable planets could not offer, the freedom of being left alone. Of mattering to nobody except yourself and your neighbors. Of building something from nothing, in the old, honest way, with your hands. The soil, once you fought the jungle back from it, was extraordinary. Deep and black and rich with centuries of decomposed jungle matter, it grew things with a fecundity that justified every hardship of the clearing. Once a field was established, protected from the roots, managed through the cold, it produced harvests that could sustain a family and supply the settlement's small trading post with surplus enough for modest comfort. Duskara, in the end, gave back what you put in. Exactly what you put in. No more, no less. Kael Raven understood this better than most. It was, in a way, the philosophy by which he lived his life. Kael Raven had come to Duskara at 23 with the particular look of a young man who has decided something absolutely and is not going to discuss it. He had grown up on Quella's station, a mid-belt orbital platform in the Velhari system, industrial and crowded and gray, where people were born into jobs that had been their parents' jobs and would be their children's jobs, and where the sky was a viewport and the stars were something you saw on navigation screens, not with your own eyes. He had not been unhappy on Quellas, exactly. Unhappiness requires a comparison, you have to know what you're missing to feel the lack of it. But he had been restless in a way that the station's walls kept making worse, a way that no amount of honest work in the platform's agricultural sector seemed to address. He wanted ground under his feet. He wanted a horizon. He wanted, and he was 23 and did not have the vocabulary for it yet, he wanted to build something that was his, from the beginning, because he had decided to, in a place where the decision had cost him something. The Duskara land grant had cost him everything he had saved in 4 years of station work, plus a loan from the settlement cooperative that took 8 years to repay. He arrived with the land grant certificate, a bag of high-yield cold climate seeds developed specifically for Duskaran soil conditions, for basic tools, a temporary shelter unit, and, this was what the other new settlers noticed about him and could not quite categorize, an absolute, untroubled calm. He was not naive. He knew it would be hard. He had done his research, spoken to everyone who would speak to him about what Duskara actually was. He simply had decided that hard was acceptable. That hard was, in some way he could not fully articulate, the point. The first 3 seasons were a kind of sustained education in how wrong he had been about what hard meant. He lost his first crop to a root intrusion he had not detected in time. His second to a temperature drop that came 2 weeks earlier than predicted and which he had not prepared for adequately. His first genuine harvest, was taken by a storm that he sat through in his barely adequate shelter and listened to, destroying 8 months of work in 6 hours. He sat in the shelter after the storm, in the silence that followed, and he did the accounting in his head. He catalogued what he had left. He thought about the cooperative loan. He thought about Kael Station, where his old colleagues were going to work in the same gray corridors and coming home to the same gray quarters and looking at the same viewport sky. Then he went out into the mud and he started again. By year 5 he had a functioning farm. By year 7 he had built the farmhouse, himself, mostly, with occasional help from neighbors in the settlement's cooperative labor arrangement, a low, solid, thick-walled structure that was not beautiful and was not large and was, in every timber and every stone, precisely the product of one man's decision to make something real from nothing. He was proud of it in a way he never discussed with anyone. He ran his hand along the outer wall sometimes, in passing, without meaning to. Just to confirm it was there. He was a quiet man in social settings, not shy, not unfriendly, simply someone for whom words were tools to be used efficiently rather than materials to be played with. He listened well. He remembered everything. He had opinions that were considered and carefully formed and that he would share, clearly and briefly, if asked, and otherwise keep to himself. He did not gossip. He did not complain. When something went wrong, and on Duskara, things went wrong reliably, he dealt with it, and then he moved on. His hands were the most telling thing about him. They were large and darkly calloused and bore the record of every year on Duskara in their scarring and their thickness, a burn here from a heat unit failure, a crooked finger there from a break badly set in the field, the deep stain of Duskaran soil in the lines of his knuckles that never fully washed out. They were, by any conventional measure, not remarkable hands. They had built a farmhouse. They had cleared 20 hectares of jungle edge. They had pulled 3 difficult harvests back from the edge of failure through sheer, patient, day-by-day work. They were the most honest hands Kael Raven ever knew. Sarah was Duskara born, which on the settlement was a distinction that carried real weight. Her family, the Voss family, trappers from the northern ridges, had been on planet for 2 generations before her, which made her, in the particular culture of Duskaran settlers, something close to aristocracy. Not in wealth or status, nobody on Duskara had either in any meaningful quantity, but in the specific, unspoken authority of someone who had grown up knowing how to read this world. She had grown up in the northern ridge settlements, where the jungle was denser and the cold was worse and the people were correspondingly harder-edged, more self-sufficient, less inclined towards sentiment. Her father had been a trapper of the old school, a man who went into the jungle for days at a time with minimal equipment and came back with what he had gone for, every time, because the alternative was not returning at all, and that was simply not something he entertained. He had taught Sarah to track before she could write her name. He had taught her to read weather from the movement of luminescent vines and the behavior of the small prey animals at the jungle's edge. He had taught her to be still, completely, absolutely still, both physically and internally, because the jungle's most dangerous things were triggered by movement and by the particular frequency of human anxiety, which they could apparently detect. Stillness, her father told her, was not the absence of feeling. It was the mastery of it. You were afraid, you were always afraid, but you held it somewhere quiet inside you and you did not let it drive. This lesson had become the foundation of who Sarah was. She was not, from a distance, a particularly imposing figure. She was lean rather than large, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with the quality of someone who takes up exactly as much space as they need and wastes none. Her eyes were the remarkable thing, dark green, almost black in certain lights, with a quality of attention in them that made most people slightly self-conscious, as if they were being read more thoroughly and accurately than they were comfortable with. She had come to the southern settlements at 20 to work for the cooperative's medical station. She had taught herself medicine from the settlement's small library of downloaded texts with the same systematic thoroughness she applied to everything, and while she was not formally trained, she was functionally better than most formally trained people in the specific conditions of Duskaran settlement life, where the injuries were agricultural and the emergency equipment was basic in them. Distance to proper medical facilities was 3 orbital transfers and several days of travel. She had met Idrin at a cooperative work gathering in her second season south. She had noticed him before he noticed her, because she noticed things before other people did, and because there was something about the way he moved through a social space, self-contained, unhurried, listening more than he spoke, that struck her as both familiar and interesting. He was, she understood fairly quickly, the kind of person she could be in a room with without feeling the particular low-level drain that most social contact cost her. This was, in Sarah's reckoning, sufficient. She proposed to him, practically and directly, after 6 months. Idrin had been so surprised that he had laughed, that low, caught-off-guard sound that became Sarah's favorite sound in the world, and said yes before he had finished laughing. They built their life together with the same approach they brought to every other problem, practically, methodically, without drama, showing up every day and doing the work. They were not a demonstrative couple in the ways that outsiders could see. They did not make grand gestures. They did not speak at length about their feelings. What they had was something quieter and more structural, a fluency in each other that had been built over years, a private language of glances and silences and the specific way one of them would position themselves near the other when something was difficult. A physical proximity that said, without words, I am here. I know. We are in this the same way we have always been in everything. They wanted a child for years before Kael came. They did not speak of the wanting, not out loud, not between them. There was a quality to the silence around that subject in the farmhouse that both of them understood without needing to name. When it became clear, finally, in Sarah's 31st year, that the waiting was over, Idrin had sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the worn wood for a long time, saying nothing. Sarah had stood across the table and watched his face. She had not seen that expression on him before. She filed it carefully. She thought, there it is. That is the thing underneath everything else. That is the full size of what this man contains. She went to him and put her hand on the back of his neck, warm and steady, as she always was, and they stayed like that in the kitchen for a while, in the particular silence of two people experiencing something too large for words and too important to try. The great storms of Duskara were seasonal. They came from the deep south, where the jungle was oldest and most complex, pushing warm, wet air northward to collide with the cold atmosphere that sat permanently above the settled regions. When they arrived, they were not subtle. They announced themselves from hours away, a darkness building on the southern horizon that was distinct from Duskara's general darkness, deeper, moving, accompanied by a distant sound like something very large breathing. The storm that arrived on the night of Kael's birth was, by the account of every settler who survived it, among the largest anyone had witnessed. It began in the late afternoon, a smear of building darkness in the south, the luminescent vines along the jungle edge going from their usual slow pulse to something rapid and agitated, the small animals retreating from the boundary in numbers that told the experienced eye exactly what was coming. Idrin had spent the afternoon securing the farm. He worked methodically, the livestock first, herded into the reinforced lower barn and settled, then the equipment, the tools that could not be replaced easily, the seed stores carefully waterproofed, then the farmhouse itself, shutters sealed, the roof's vulnerable section on the east side braced with the additional support he had built specifically for storm season. He worked fast and efficiently and without visible anxiety, because panic was not useful and he had long since made his peace with Duskara's weather as one of the things that simply was, and required management rather than emotion. He was finishing the last of the roof bracing when Sarah appeared in the farmhouse doorway. She said nothing. She did not need to. The way she was standing, hand on the doorframe, that particular quality of stillness that she brought to important things, told him everything. He came down from the roof in seconds. Sarah labored through the storm. For 11 hours, as Duskara shook and the rain came down in solid walls and the lightning split the sky in colors that had no names, she worked with the same quality of total focus she brought to everything, breathing deliberately, staying present, managing what could be managed. She had attended enough difficult births in the settlement to know exactly what was happening and what was needed and what to expect. She did not cry out. Not once. Not from stoicism exactly, not from performance. She was in more pain than she had ever been in, and she was aware of this as information rather than drama. She filed it. She breathed. She continued. Idren sat beside her and was what she needed him to be, which was present. He held her hand when she wanted it held. He moved when she needed him to move. He did not speak when she did not want speech. He had never felt so useful while doing so little, and never felt so acutely the particular helplessness of loving someone completely and being unable to take their burden from them. The storm reached its absolute peak in the 11th hour. The lightning that had been frequent became continuous, the sky outside the farmhouse window cycling through impossible colors, blue and white and a deep burning violet that had no business appearing in a natural sky. The thunder was no longer distinct strikes but a continuous, rolling, bone-deep vibration that the farmhouse absorbed and transmitted through its walls and floor. The rain was deafening. And then, at the exact peak, at the moment of the storm's maximum fury, one final strike of lightning hit somewhere very close. The light it produced was not white. It was not violet. It was green. A searing, electric, absolute green that poured through every crack in every shutter and flooded the room completely for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. And in that green light, Kael Raven arrived. He did not cry, the way most newborns cry, that reflexive, surprised protest at being expelled from warmth into cold. He breathed. He inflated his lungs with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided to be here and is going about it properly. And then he was still. And then he opened his eyes. The room was no longer lit by lightning, the great strike had passed, the storm already beginning its slow retreat. The light was the ordinary lamplight of the farmhouse interior, warm and yellow and completely inadequate for what it was now illuminating. The eyes that looked up from Sarah's arms were green. Not hazel, not gray-green, not the muddy approximate green that passed for eye color in most people. Green. Precise, saturated, extraordinary, the exact color the sky had been in that final lightning strike, as if the storm had looked down, found this child worthy, and decided to leave its mark. Idren stared at those eyes for a long time. He felt something move through him that was so large and so complex it had no single name. It was pride and love and fear and awe and the specific terror of a person who has been given something so precious that the primary emotion it produces is the fear of losing it. He would never, in the rest of his life, find words adequate to what he felt in that moment. Sarah looked at her son. Really looked at him, with those dark green eyes of hers, that total quality of attention, taking him in completely. She was exhausted beyond any exhaustion she had previously experienced. She was in pain she would not acknowledge. She was, in this moment, more completely herself than she had ever been.
He's going to be trouble.
She was smiling when she said it. The most radiant, private, fierce, tender smile Idren had ever seen on a human face. She was not wrong. Kael Raven learned to walk at 9 months, which was early. He learned to run shortly after, which was perhaps the more revealing development. He did not walk when running was available. He did not observe from a distance when going to look was an option. From the moment he had legs capable of carrying him anywhere, he applied them to the purpose of going absolutely everywhere, at the highest speed achievable, which created for Idren and Sarah the specific parenting challenge of managing a small human who was simultaneously brilliant, fearless, and faster than expected. By the time he was 3, Kael had achieved what Sarah catalogued privately as perimeter awareness. He knew the farm's boundaries with a precision that suggested he had mapped them deliberately, which she was fairly certain he had. He knew which sections of the southern boundary fence were weakest. He knew where the shade stalker tracks appeared most often at the jungle edge. He knew this not because anyone had told him but because he had looked, systematically, and remembered everything he saw. He had Sarah's eyes. Not just the color, the quality of attention behind them, that same total focus that his mother brought to the world. When Kael looked at something, he looked at it the way light goes into a lens, completely, taking in everything, not leaving anything out. It had a slightly disconcerting effect on people meeting him for the first time, because there was no child's vagueness in it, no wandering quality of a young mind still learning to settle. Even at 3, at 4, at 5, Kael's attention, when directed at you, felt like being read. He had Idrin's silence. He did not chatter. He did not fill space with noise the way many children do. He observed first. He considered. Then, when he spoke, it was because he had something specific to say, and what he said was almost always precisely what he meant. One morning in his 4th year, he walked beside his father along the farm's western boundary, small legs working twice as fast to match Idrin's unhurried stride, his small face serious with the effort of keeping pace, and he said, without preamble,
"Father, the western crops are failing but the eastern ones are not. The soil looks the same. It isn't the same, is it?"
It was not a question. Idrin stopped walking. He looked at his son. 4 years old. Looking back up at him with those green eyes, patient, waiting.
"No,
Idrin said, after a moment.
it isn't. The water table runs under the eastern section. The western side gets less drainage. It's slightly more acidic over time.
Can you fix it?
Slowly, with lime treatment over a few seasons."
Kael nodded, filing this. They walked on. A minute later, he said.
When can I help?
Idrin looked at this 4-year-old person walking beside him with his small, serious face and his absolute conviction that the answer was yes, just tell me when.
"Now you can start now."
He did not know, until that moment, how much he had needed to hear someone ask. The interior of Kael Raven's early childhood was not simple, despite, or perhaps because of, how capable he was. He loved his parents with a completeness that embarrassed him slightly because he had no framework for what to do with feelings that large. He was a child who processed everything, every input, every observation, with a rapidity and depth that left him, at the end of each day, holding more than he knew what to do with. The farm, the jungle, the 2 moons, the cold, the smell of Duskaran soil, the sound of his mother's voice in the next room, his father's hands at work, he absorbed all of it with the intensity of someone who, on some level he could not access consciously, already knew that the time for this was limited. He did not know this consciously. But the feeling was there, underneath, a quality of paying attention that went beyond the normal. As if he was storing it. As if he understood, in some pre-verbal way, that these things were precious and would not last forever, and the way to honor them was to know them as completely as possible while they were available to be known. He was afraid of several things, though he told almost no one about any of them. He was afraid of being wrong. Not the small wrongness of an incorrect answer or a misjudged task, the deeper wrongness of being fundamentally mistaken about something important and not knowing it. He was so often right, so obviously and accurately right about the things he observed, that the few times he was wrong hit him with a force disproportionate to the error. He catalogued these moments carefully. He turned them over. He learned from them with a thoroughness that cost him something. He was afraid of the thing that happened sometimes when he moved without thinking, when his body responded to something before his mind had formed a conscious intention. The tool caught before it fell. The jump made before the decision to jump. It happened rarely, but when it did, it left him with a feeling he could not name. Not pride. Something more unsettling. As if part of him was operating from a set of instructions he had not been shown. And he was afraid, with a fear so deep it lived below everything else like bedrock, of the night sky. Not afraid of the dark, not afraid of the stars themselves, afraid of what they made him feel. Which was an aching, pulling, sourceless longing that had no object and no resolution, that came every time he looked up for long enough, that felt like homesickness for a place he had never been. He had no name for it. He had no one he could tell. It lived in him, below the questions and the observations and the capability, quiet and persistent and enormous, a sense that he was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something he had not yet been told about, moving towards something he could not see. He was 4 years old when he first felt it. He would feel it every night for the rest of his life. The year Kael turned 5, Idrin began teaching him the farm in earnest. Not the simple tasks, those Kael had been absorbing since he could walk. The real work. The thinking work. How to read a crop for early signs of disease. How to track the jungle's advance by the behavior of specific indicator plants at the boundary. How to manage a harvest schedule when the cold season came early, which on Duskara it often did, and the margins were tighter than expected. These lessons happened in motion, walking the farm, working beside each other, the teaching woven into the doing so naturally that it did not feel like instruction. Idren showed, then stood back, then watched. He corrected quietly, without drama, when correction was needed. He acknowledged, also quietly, when something was done well. He did not praise extravagantly. Kael understood quickly that a single nod from his father, a specific quality of silence that meant he had seen and was satisfied, was worth more than any amount of effusive approval. Kael wanted that nod the way he wanted almost nothing else. He worked harder than was strictly necessary. He went back to things and redid them when he thought he could do better. He watched the way Idren approached problems, the particular, calm, systematic quality of his father's thinking, working through from first principles, discarding what didn't fit, arriving at solutions that were always the minimum necessary and exactly sufficient, and he copied it consciously, deliberately, because it seemed to him the most honest way of thinking he had encountered. In the evenings, in the farmhouse kitchen, Sarah taught him other things. She had a different teaching style than Idren, more verbal, more direct, more willing to sit and talk a thing through to its edges. She taught him to read from the settlement's downloaded library, starting with the practical texts, botany, medicine, animal behavior, engineering basics, and moving outward from there into history, into the small library of fiction the settlement had accumulated, into the navigational and astronomical texts that were accessible through the cooperative's database subscription. It was Sarah who first noticed that Kael did not read things the way other children read things. Most children read forward, sequentially, losing the thread and finding it again, retaining some and losing some, the knowledge sitting in them loosely. Kael read something once and it was there. All of it. Not just the main points, the detail, the specific phrasing, the page it had been on in the document, the feeling of reading it. He did not know this was unusual. He had no comparison. It was simply how his mind worked, a structure, she later understood, that was less like a library and more like a map, everything connected to everything else, every new thing finding its place in a web of relation and cross-reference that grew more complex and more useful with every addition. She watched this with the careful attention she brought to all important things, and she felt, alongside the pride, something that took her time to identify. She felt the beginning of grief. Not grief for anything that had happened. Grief for what was coming. For what she already knew, in the part of herself that was honest about hard things, this child was and what that meant for where he was going. She told Idren, late one night after Kael was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with the farms quiet around them, that she thought their son was something she did not have a full name for yet. Something beyond the scale of what Duskara could hold. Idren was quiet for a while. Then he said,
I know.
2 words. But the weight in them was enormous. They sat with that for a while. The farmhouse breathed around them. Outside, the jungle pulsed its slow bioluminescent light. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand over his. Neither of them said what they were really thinking. They did not need to. He found the way up to the roof in his 6th year, a sequence of handholds along the eastern wall that required a degree of upper body strength that most 6-year-olds lacked and that Kael had in unusual abundance. He had been eyeing it for months, calculating the route with the methodical patience of someone who has learned to observe before acting, waiting until he was certain he could make the climb without assistance and without falling. The first time he reached the roof and lay back on the cold tiles and looked up, he was undone by it. Duskara's sky, on a clear night when the clouds broke and the 2 moons were not both full enough to wash out the background, was among the most extraordinary skies in the Belhari system. The planet's position at the system's outer edge meant minimal light pollution from the pale sun. The cold, thin atmosphere scattered less light and emitted more. The stars above Duskara were not the discrete, separate points of more light-polluted skies, they were a depth. Layer upon layer upon layer, a thickness of stars that seemed to go back forever, the nearer ones crisp and bright and the deeper ones a continuous luminous haze that gave the sky a texture, a dimensionality, that you could spend hours in and still not exhaust. Kael lay on the cold roof tiles and looked at this sky and felt it hit him somewhere he had not known was available to be hit. The longing that lived in him at all times, the unnamed, sourceless ache that had been his companion since he was old enough to stand at the farm's southern boundary and look out at the jungle, that intensified when he looked at the star charts on the old datapad, that visited him in dreams in the form of movement, of speed, of vast distances passing, that longing found the sky above him and answered it. He did not cry. He was 6 years old and had already developed, from his mother's example and from his own nature, a quality of self-containment that kept the largest feelings internal. But he lay on those cold tiles for an hour and a half, until the cold became genuinely dangerous and he made himself climb down, and during that hour and a half he felt, with absolute clarity, two things simultaneously. The first was that he was home, here, on this farm, with these people. That this was true and real and irreplaceable and that he would carry it always. The second was that he was supposed to be out there. In that. Among those impossible depths of light and distance. That something was waiting for him in that darkness that he could not see yet and could not name yet, but that was as real as the tiles under his back and the cold in his lungs. Both things were true. Both things were enormous. They sat in him side by side, these two vast and contradictory certainties, and he had no idea what to do with either of them except to hold them. He came back to the rooftop every clear night for the next 3 years.
He never told anyone. The farming settlement that the Raven farm belonged to was called Varda's Reach, named after the first cooperative coordinator who had organized the southern farms into a functional community 40 years before Kael was born. It comprised 18 farms, a cooperative trading post, a small school operated by rotation among the parents, a medical station where Sarah worked 2 days each week, and approximately 90 people in various states of dusty, determined, Duskaran weathered existence.
Kael attended the settlement school from age 5, which was when the cooperative's educational rotation began. He understood, very early, that school was going to present him with a specific challenge that had nothing to do with the material. The challenge was other children. This was not because he disliked them. He did not dislike them. He observed them with the same focused attention he brought to everything else, and what he observed was genuinely interesting, the variety of the ways people moved through the world, the different approaches to problems, the specific social physics of a group of children working out their hierarchy and their alliances and their codes. He found it fascinating in the way he found most things fascinating. The problem was that they did not know what to do with him. He was too quiet for the children who wanted animated playmates. Too physical for the ones who wanted intellectual companions. Too fast, too precise, too unsettlingly attentive for almost all of them, at least at first. He did not show off, genuinely, not as performance, because he had no interest in comparison. He simply was what he was, which on Duskara, as at most small settlements, had a way of making people defensive when what you were turned out to be significantly more than what they were. There were 3 boys who became reliably difficult. Older by 2 or 3 years, large for their ages, with the particular social confidence of children who have identified physical size as the primary currency of their peer group. They were not bad children, not in any fundamental sense, but they were boys who had not yet encountered anything that pushed back against the rules they had decided applied. Kael was the first thing that pushed back. Without meaning to. Simply by existing the way he existed, unimpressed by them, unafraid of them, looking at them with those green eyes that seemed, to their great annoyance, to see exactly what they were doing and find it mildly interesting rather than threatening. They made his life difficult in the routine ways available to them. He was excluded from things. He was the subject of small, targeted cruelties, his possessions moved, untrue things said about him in the social economy of the settlement's children. He was challenged physically, twice, and both times the challenger experienced something that confused and alarmed them. Kael did not fight back in any way they recognized. He simply was not where they expected him to be. He moved differently, not aggressively, just differently, with a spatial awareness and speed that left their attempts to intimidate him looking foolish without him doing anything that could be specifically objected to. He told Idrin about this, one evening, because he told his father most things and because he was trying to understand it rather than complain about it.
They don't like that they can't get a reaction. When you stop being a good source of the reaction they want, they'll recalibrate.
That takes longer than you'd think.
Idrin almost smiled.
Yes, it does.
Is it worth trying to explain myself to them?
No, people explain themselves when they're trying to change someone's mind. You don't need them to change their minds. You just need them to get used to the fact that you're here.
Kael sat with this. Then,
That's lonely.
Idrin put down the tool and looked at his son properly.
Yes, it is. I won't tell you it isn't. Being something unusual is often lonely. That doesn't make it wrong.
Kael looked at his father's face, the weathered, careful, honest face that he knew as well as he knew anything in the world.
Were you lonely? When you came here? When you were building?
Idrin picked up the tool again. He was quiet for a while.
Yes, until your mother.
He did not say, until you. But Kael heard it anyway. The event that changed everything happened on a cold, clear afternoon in Kael's 8th year, when the jungle was doing what it always did in the 3rd season, exhaling, its luminescence slightly brighter in the lower temperatures, its sounds more audible in the still air. The 3 boys, Tef, Oren, and the one they called Brick, whose actual name nobody seemed to use, had been building towards something for weeks. There was a quality to their behavior around Kael that had been shifting, escalating, moving from the simple exclusion of earlier years towards something that required more from them. They needed, Kael understood, to establish something definitively. To find the thing that would make him react, or failing that, to find the thing that would demonstrate to the watching settlement children that they were braver, that they would go further, that they were more. The idea of going into the jungle's edge had been circulating for days. Kael had heard about it the way he heard about most things in the settlement, not from anyone telling him directly, but from the ambient information that accumulated around him when he was listening, which was always. He knew it was coming. He knew it was partly for him, that his presence on the dare was, for Tef and Oren and Brick, the point. He thought about it for 2 days. Carefully and honestly.
He was afraid of the jungle in the honest way, not a frozen, paralyzing fear, but the clear-eyed respect for something genuinely dangerous that his parents had instilled in him and that his own observations had confirmed. He knew what lived in there. He understood what the risks were. He also wanted, with a wanting that had nothing to do with the dare and everything to do with himself, to go.
He had been studying the jungle from the ridge for years. He had memorized its edge, mapped its rhythms, tracked the behavior of the boundary creatures with the patient thoroughness of someone who is preparing, unconsciously but systematically, for something. The jungle called to him the way the stars did, not comfortably, not safely, but with the particular authority of something that contained things he needed to know. When the dare came, formally, on the 3rd afternoon of the week, with the 3 boys and their audience of settlement children arrayed in the particular way of people who have arranged a performance, Kael looked at them for a moment. Then he said,
All right.
Not for them. For himself. They went in at the nearest gap in the boundary fence, single file, Tef leading with the particular swagger of someone who has committed to a performance and intends to see it through. Oren behind him, then Brick, then Kael at the back. The watching children stayed at the boundary, which was its own information. The jungle received them with complete indifference. Inside the tree line, the quality of everything changed immediately. The cold deepened, the canopy blocked what little warmth the pale sun provided, and the air beneath it was the air of deep shade, still and cold and somehow thicker, carrying the jungle's complex smell, rot and growth and the sharp green bitterness of the luminescent organisms, and underneath all of it something older and darker that had no name in any human vocabulary. The light changed. What had been the ordinary silver daylight of Duskara became, within 50 meters, something filtered and fragmentary, shards of illumination falling through the canopy in shifting patterns as the high fronds moved in air currents too subtle to feel from the ground. The bioluminescent threads on the trees at this level were dimmer than they appeared from the outside, their light competing with the filtered daylight and losing, so that the overall effect was of a dimming, a narrowing, a world growing smaller and more specific with every meter inward. Kael was at the back, which meant he was watching all three boys ahead of him. He was noting things. The way Tef's swagger had modulated within 100 meters into something more careful. The way Oren was staying very close to Tef's left shoulder. The way Brick kept glancing upward. He was also noting the jungle itself. The indicator species at this depth. The absence of small prey animals, which meant something had moved through recently and displaced them. The quality of the silence, not empty silence, but the specific silence of a space where the things that made noise had decided to stop making it.
Thanks. We are being watched.
He did not say this. There was no way to say it that would not produce panic, and panic was the worst possible response to what he suspected was happening. They were approximately 400 meters in when it came. The shade stalker dropped from the canopy above and ahead of them, and even knowing what it was, even having observed it from distance and studied its hunting patterns in every text the settlement library had on Duskaran fauna, the reality of it up close was something that hit Kael's body before his mind had time to categorize it. A spike of pure, cold, physical fear through the center of his chest, electric, immediate, complete. His heart accelerated in a single beat to a rate he had not felt before. Every part of him that operated below the level of conscious decision, the ancient parts, the survival parts, activated simultaneously. The shade stalker was larger than he had estimated from distance. Its coloring made it almost invisible against the black tree trunks. He could see it only because he was looking directly at it, and even then the edges of it were difficult to read in the fragmented light. Its eyes were enormous, flat, amber gold, reflecting the bioluminescence. It was crouched low, weight forward, coiled. He knew what that posture meant. Tef, Oren, and Brick had frozen. Kael moved. Later, trying to reconstruct it for his own understanding, he would not be able to account for the gap between the fear, the pure, cold spike of it, and the movement. There was no conscious decision in between. The fear arrived. And then he was already moving, as if the fear itself had launched him. He crossed the ground between himself and the nearest boy, Oren, the smallest, in a time that he could not have calculated, and shoved him sideways and to the ground with a force calibrated, without his conscious input, to get the boy clear without injuring him. Then he had the fallen branch in his hand, heavy, substantial, roughly 1.5 meters in length, without consciously deciding to pick it up, and he was between the other boys and the shade stalker, and he was afraid. He needs to say that, in this reconstruction. He was genuinely, profoundly, not metaphorically afraid. His hands on the branch were shaking. He could feel the shaking, and he registered it as information, adrenaline, normal, manageable, and he held the branch steady through the shaking, which cost him more than anything he had done yet. The shade stalker looked at him. He looked back. Something happened in that exchange that he spent years trying to understand. It was not that the animal recognized him, he had no reason to think that. It was not that he communicated with it in any way he had conscious control over. It was more that something in him, the same something that moved him before his mind could form the decision, turned its attention toward the creature and reached. There was no better word. Something reached out, below the fear and the adrenaline and the cold and the shaking hands, and made contact with something in the animal. Then came the sound from his chest and throat, low, rhythmic, resonant, arriving without decision or intent, a vibration that went outward in all directions and seemed to find the space between his heartbeat and the shade stalker's. The coiled tension in the animal's body released. It was a slow process, not instant, not dramatic. A gradual unclenching, like a fist opening finger by finger. The weight shifted back from the forward crouch. The enormous eyes, still fixed on him, changed in some quality he could not name precisely, the flatness giving way to something else. Not recognition. Something more like recalibration. A reassessment. Then it turned. It moved back into the trees in 4 long, fluid, completely silent strides. It was gone. Kael stood where he was for a moment, still holding the branch, still making the sound, until he became aware he was still making it and let it stop. The silence it left behind felt very large. Then his legs informed him, firmly, that they were done with this. He locked his knees. He breathed through the adrenaline crash, the wave of shaking that came when the immediate danger passed and his body released everything it had been holding. His heart was working so hard he could feel it in his ears. His eyes were stinging in a way he refused to permit. He stood there breathing until the shaking subsided. It took longer than he would have chosen. Behind him, Tef, Oren, and Brick were in various states of disintegration. Oren was crying quietly. Brick was sitting on the ground, staring at the space where the animal had been, gray-faced. Tef was standing absolutely still with the expression of someone whose understanding of themselves has been significantly revised in a very short time. Kael looked at them. He steadied himself further. He settled his voice.
We should go back now.
His voice was perfectly even. He was immensely proud of that. They came out of the jungle single file. Kael last, watching behind them. The settlement children waiting at the boundary saw them emerge and read their faces immediately. Children are accurate instruments for reading the specific frequency of something serious has happened, and the story was circulating within minutes. By the time Kael reached the farmhouse, Idrin was already standing outside. He had heard, from 2 separate people in the time it took Kael to walk from the boundary to the farm's yard. He was standing with his arms at his sides and the particular quality of stillness that meant he was containing something large. Kael stopped in front of him. They looked at each other. Idrin put one large hand on the side of Kael's face, briefly, carefully, and then he let it drop, and he turned and went back inside without speaking. That night, after supper, after Kael had told them everything with the precise, unembellished honesty he brought to all accounts, Sarah sat across from him and was quiet for a moment. Then she said,
The sound you made. Where did it come from?
Kael thought about it.
I don't know. I didn't decide to make it.
Sarah looked at him for a long time with those dark green eyes. Reading him, the way she always could.
It came from the right place. That's enough for now.
He went to bed, and lay in the dark, and looked at the ceiling he knew perfectly, and held what had happened inside him and turned it over. He had been afraid. Really, genuinely afraid, more afraid than he had language for. And the thing that had happened, the reaching, the sound, the strange contact with the creature's awareness, he did not understand it and it unsettled him. But underneath the unsettlement was something else. Something quieter and more fundamental. He had stayed. He had not run. He had been afraid and he had stood in it and done what needed doing, and the fear had not owned him. He held this. It was, he decided, the most important thing he had learned about himself so far. He did not know it had already been seen by someone who had been looking for it for a long time. The transport that arrived at Varda's Reach 6 days after the jungle incident was a model Kael had not seen before, a mid-range administrative shuttle, clean and understated, bearing the gray and silver livery of the Interstellar Academy of Velhari. It landed on the cooperative small landing pad with the careful precision of a craft being handled by a skilled pilot who was trying not to draw attention, which had the opposite effect. Everything that landed at Varda's Reach drew attention. Visitors were infrequent. Official visitors in Academy livery had never happened before. Commander Aldris Vane emerged from the shuttle and stood for a moment on the landing pad, looking around at the settlement with an expression that gave away nothing, the practiced, deliberate neutrality of someone who had learned to manage their first impressions in front of an audience. He was compact and precise, somewhere in his late 40s, with close-cropped gray hair and a kind of unhurried, economical bearing that spoke of long habit rather than effort. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had forgotten it was there.
He asked for directions to the Raven farm from the first person he encountered. He walked there directly, not looking at anything more than necessary.
Kael, on the farm's eastern boundary when the man appeared on the access road, stopped what he was doing and watched him approach. He noted the uniform. He noted the bearing. He noted the particular quality of the man's attention as it found him, not the curiosity of a stranger encountering an unusual sight, but the recognition of someone arriving somewhere they expected to arrive.
A cold, specific feeling moved through him.
He knew, with the pattern recognition that he could not switch off, exactly why this man was here. He finished what he was doing on the boundary fence. Then he walked back to the farmhouse at his normal pace to tell his mother a visitor was coming. Commander Vane was precise about his purpose from the first conversation with Idrin and Sarah. He did not obscure it or approach it indirectly, which Kael, observing from a careful middle distance, noted and approved of. He had heard about the jungle incident through the settlement network. He was here in a professional capacity, representing the Academy's recruitment and assessment division. He would like, with the family's permission, to spend some time with their son. Idrin gave him one long, measuring look. Then he said,
Kael makes his own decisions about who he spends time with. Ask him.
Vane turned to Kael with an expression that might, in someone less practiced at neutrality, have been surprise. He looked at this 8-year-old person who was watching him with complete calm from the farmhouse doorway.
Would you be willing to spend some time with me? I have some things I'd like to show you, and some questions I'd like to ask.
Kael considered him for a moment.
What kind of questions?
The kind that don't have wrong answers. Mostly about how you think.
Another moment of consideration. Then,
All right.
the assessments ran across 2 days. Vane was methodical and patient and gave almost nothing away, which Kael found genuinely interesting. Most adults, he had found, leaked their reactions whether they intended to or not. Vane had achieved a quality of controlled neutrality that was itself a kind of information. This was someone who had done this many times and had learned exactly how much of his response to reveal. The cognitive assessments were not difficult in the way Kael expected tests to be difficult. They were more like conversations, Vane presenting problems and then watching not just the answers but the approach, the speed, the method, the quality of attention. Pattern recognition. Spatial reasoning. Causal inference from incomplete information. Memory retention and cross-referencing. Kael moved through them the way he moved through everything, systematically, honestly, without performing either more or less than what he was. He noticed, on the second morning, that Vane's practiced neutrality was costing him slightly more effort than it had been. Small tells, a barely perceptible pause before writing certain notes. A quality of stillness at specific moments that was different from his general stillness. There was one assessment that stayed with him. Vane placed a navigational problem before him, a three-dimensional route calculation through a simulated star system, accounting for gravitational variables, fuel constraints, and a time-sensitive objective. It was presented as a problem typically given to Academy students in their second year of training, which Vane did not tell Kael, and which Kael therefore approached without the weight of that information. He solved it in 11 minutes. He then identified a more efficient solution that the original parameters had not suggested but that he found while checking his work. Vane put down his stylus. He looked at Kael for a moment without the neutrality.
How did you find the second solution?
Kael thought about how to explain it.
The first one was what the problem asked for. But there was a gravitational assist from the third body that the problem treated as an obstacle. If you adjust the departure vector by about 4 degrees and accept a slightly longer initial leg, you get a free acceleration that more than compensates. It just looked like a better shape.
A better shape.
Vane repeated.
The route. It looked like a better shape. I don't know a more precise way to say it.
Vane picked up his stylus. He wrote something. He turned the note over before Kael could read it. That evening, after Kael had been sent to the far side of the farm on a task Idrin invented specifically to require his presence elsewhere, Kael knew this but performed the task without objection, because he understood what it was for and because listening at doors was not something his parents would have approved of. Vane sat at the kitchen table with Idrin and Sarah. Kael, from the far field, could not hear the words. He could see, from the farmhouse window at that distance, the posture of the three adults at the table, Vane leaning forward slightly, his controlled manner loosened a fraction, Idrin straight-backed and still, Sarah with her hands flat on the table, listening in the way she listened to important things. He stood in the cold field in the dark and watched the lit window. He knew the shape of what was being said in there. He knew it as certainly as he had ever known anything. He turned his face up to the sky. The stars were out, clear and deep and indifferent. He stood there for a long time, in the cold, alone with what he knew. Vane's conversation with Idrin and Sarah lasted 2 hours. He told them, with the careful precision of someone who has delivered significant news many times and has learned that the most important thing is clarity without embellishment, what the assessments had shown. He used the word exceptional first. Then extraordinary. Then, with a brief pause that indicated he did not use the next word lightly, unprecedented. In 23 years of academy recruitment and assessment across the full Velhari system and the 3 adjacent systems within which the academy's reach extended, he had not seen scores like Kael's in cognitive assessment. In the physical metrics, reaction time, spatial coordination, sensory acuity, he was recording values he had no existing category for. The navigational problem was meant to challenge second-year students. Kael's secondary solution was one that Vane intended to submit to the Academy's Route Optimization Research Division. And the incident in the jungle, the communication with the Shade Stalker, was something Vane had, in his assessment notes, marked with a notation reserved for events he could not yet classify but considered significant. He explained what the Academy offered. Full sponsorship, tuition, accommodation, equipment, everything covered. He explained the curriculum, foundational sciences, navigation, command theory, combat and tactical training, xenobiology, diplomatic protocol, propulsion engineering. He explained the environment, rigorous, demanding, competitive, but structured for development rather than attrition. He explained the timeline, a preliminary enrollment within the next year, beginning the foundation program at the Academy's orbital campus above Velhari Prime. He explained, clearly and without softening it, what it would require. Kael would need to leave Duskara. Sarah did not speak during any of this. She listened with her hands flat on the table and her face composed, and what it cost her to sit still while another person explained the future shape of her son's life, the life she had carried for 11 hours in a storm and held in her arms while the sky was still green, was a thing she kept entirely inside herself, where it belonged. Idrin asked one question.
Will he be safe?
Vane answered honestly, safer than Duskara. Better resources, medical care, structured environment. He could not promise absolute safety. Vane was not a man who made promises he could not keep, but he could say that the Academy's track record with cadets was strong, its environment controlled, its staff experienced. Idrin nodded slowly. He looked at Sarah. What passed between them in that look was a whole conversation. Years of it. All of the late-night kitchen table understandings, all of the shared reading of their son, all of the thing they had both known and neither said aloud arriving now at its conclusion. Sarah's nod was very small. It cost her everything. Idrin turned back to Vane.
Tell us what we need to sign.
That night, after Vane had returned to the settlement's visitor accommodation, Kael came and sat on the farmhouse steps.
He had known. He had known all day. He had finished the task Idrin sent him on and he had come back to the farmhouse and he had eaten supper and he had answered his parents' careful, gentle questions about his day with complete and honest answers, and he had not brought up the thing he knew, because he was waiting for them to bring it up in whatever way they chose. He owed them that. He owed them the shape of the conversation being theirs. But now it was late and the farmhouse was quiet and he could not sleep, and he sat on the steps in the cold and listened to Duskara breathe around him. Idrin came out and sat beside him. Close. Their shoulders almost touching. They sat in silence for a while, looking at the dark. Inside Kael, the thing he knew had been sitting all day was doing what it had been doing, growing. Getting more specific. More real. He had been holding it at a manageable distance for hours by keeping himself occupied, keeping his attention on external things, on the task, on supper, on the small ordinary mechanics of a Duskara evening. Now, sitting in the quiet with his father, there was nothing to occupy him and the distance collapsed. He was 8 years old. He had never slept anywhere but this farm. His mother's voice was the sound he fell asleep to. His father's hands were the most familiar things in his world. The jungle glow on the southern horizon was so completely part of his understanding of existence that he could not imagine a sky without it. He was being asked to leave all of it. For something enormous and true and right that he did not want. The wanting and the not wanting were both real. Both completely, painfully real. He sat with both of them in the cold, not speaking. Then Idrin said, quietly,
You already know, don't you?
Not a question.
Kael nodded.
You don't have to go, I need you to know that first. Nobody decides this but you.
Kael turned and looked at his father's profile in the dark. The familiar lines of it. The jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he held his hands when he was feeling something he would not put into the air.
But you think I should?
Idrin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way of someone carrying a great weight very steadily.
I think that you were not made for this farm. And I think you've known that longer than I have. And I think the hardest thing a person can do is want something better for someone they love than they have for themselves.
Kael looked at his hands in his lap. He felt the thing inside him that had been growing all day reach full size. He held it there. He sat with the full weight of it. His father's words, and what they cost this man to say, and what it meant that he said them anyway.
Thanks. I don't want better. I want this. I want exactly this.
He said nothing. Because even now, even at 8, even through the grief of it, some part of him knew his father was right. He had known it on the rooftop every clear night for 2 years. He had known it the moment the navigational charts made sense without anyone teaching him. He had known it in the jungle, when the shade stalker looked at him and he had reached for it and found something there. He had always known.
Will you be all right?
His voice came out smaller than he intended.
Idrin put his hand on the back of Kael's neck. Warm. Solid. The most familiar feeling in the world.
We will be all right because you will be all right, and that is all we need.
The months between Vane's visit and the departure were months that Kael stored with deliberate, conscious care. He understood, without anyone telling him, that this was the last of something. He did not know exactly what shape the last of it would take, but he understood that the boy he was on Duskara, with these people, in this specific combination of farm and cold and jungle glow, that boy existed only here, only in this, and when he left, the boy would end and something else would begin. He was not entirely sure how he felt about that. He thought about it often. He worked harder on the farm in those months than he had before. There was something in him that needed to give back, to pour as much of himself into the work of this place as it had poured into him. He rose before Idrin most mornings and had already begun on the day's first tasks when his father came out into the cold. Idrin said nothing about this. He simply joined him, and they worked side by side in the pre-dawn dark, and the silence between them in those mornings had a quality that Kael would spend the rest of his life trying to find again and never quite manage. Idrin taught him things in those months that went beyond the practical. One afternoon, 3 weeks before departure, they sat on the high ridge above the farm, the ridge where you could see the jungle stretching to the horizon, and Idrin was quiet for a long time before he spoke.
The thing about difficult places is that they teach you the difference between what you need and what you want. Most places give you enough that you can confuse the two. A place like this doesn't let you.
Kael sat beside him, looking at the jungle.
The academy will be a different kind of difficult. People mostly. People are harder than weather. Weather is honest. It does what it does without any interest in how you feel about it. People decide what they do based on how they feel about you, which is harder to predict and harder to manage.
How do you manage it?
You look for who they are under what they want you to think they are. Usually those are two different things. The underneath is what you can work with. The surface is just noise.
Kael stored this.
And if the underneath is bad?
Then you know, and knowing is always better than not knowing. even when what you know is hard.
He paused. He picked up a small stone from the ridge and turned it in his calloused fingers.
There's one more thing, more important than all of it.
He looked at his son.
You are going to be capable of things that most people aren't. You probably already know this. The temptation, when you're capable in ways others aren't, is to stop asking whether you should do something and only ask whether you can. Don't do that, ever. What you're capable of is never the point. What's right is the point. Always, even when it's harder, especially when it's harder.
Kael looked at his father's face. He felt the weight of those words go into him and find their permanent place. They were still there, decades later, in moments of extraordinary pressure and impossible decision, when everything was on the line and the easiest path was the wrong one. His father's voice, on a cold ridge above Duskara, saying, "What's right is the point." Always. The night before departure, Sarah came to Kael's room after the farmhouse was dark. She sat on the edge of his bed. She held something in her hands, a small package, wrapped in a treated hide cloth the northern trappers used for things that needed to survive hard conditions.
From your grandfather. He gave it to me when I left the northern settlement. He said it was from his father, and his father's father before that. He said it had been to more places than any of them could map.
Kael unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a compass, not a navigational instrument, not a technological tool, but an old-fashioned mechanical compass of the kind that pointed toward a planet's magnetic north. It was small and worn and the case was scratched in 100 places. The needle moved with a smooth, certain precision that spoke of remarkable quality despite its age.
It won't work the same on every world. The magnetic fields are different. But it will always tell you one thing, where you are relative to somewhere. That's all a compass does. It doesn't tell you where to go. It just tells you where you stand.
She looked at him in the dim light.
You're going to get lost. Not on maps. In yourself. Everyone does. It just happens differently depending on who you are. When it happens to you, it will probably be because you've been whatever everyone around you needed you to be for so long that you've lost track of what you actually are.
She touched the compass in his hands.
When that happens, take this out. Hold it. Remember where you came from. Not as a limitation. As a reference point. You always have one. You always know where you stand relative to this place, and to us.
Kael held the compass and looked at his mother's face in the dark.
I don't want to go.
It was the first time he had said it aloud to anyone. Sarah looked at him for a long, quiet moment.
I know. I know you don't. And it's true and real and you're right to feel it. And I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter, or that it'll be easy.
She paused.
But I am going to tell you this. The wanting to stay and the needing to go are both part of the same thing. The wanting to stay tells you what you love. The needing to go tells you what you are. Both of them are true. And a person who knows both, what they love and what they are, has a foundation that almost no one has.
She put her arms around him then and held him the way she had held him when he was small, completely, without reservation, and he held her back with the full force of everything he was carrying.
I am so proud of you. Not for what you can do. For who you are while you do it.
She held him for a long time. Then she let go, and stood up, and left his room quietly, and he lay in the dark with the compass on his chest, listening to the farmhouse breathe. He did not sleep. He was up before the farm. Before the cold pre-dawn movement of the settlement, before the first birds at the jungle edge began their calls, before even the pale attempt at sunrise that Duskara's distant sun produced each morning. He dressed in the dark. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while, hands in his lap, compass in his hands, listening. He listened to the farmhouse the way he had listened to it 1,000 times, its specific creaks, the sound of the heat unit cycling, the faint ambient hum of the cold outside pressing against the walls. He knew this sound. He had fallen asleep to it every night of his existence. He pressed it into his memory with the same careful deliberateness he had been applying for months. Then he stood and picked up his bag and went to the kitchen.
He stood in the kitchen in the dark for a long time. Not doing anything. Just standing in it. The worn table. His mother's herb shelf, the dried plants she used in her medicines, the ones from the jungle edge that she processed herself, filling the kitchen with a smell that was so completely and specifically this place that it hit him somewhere behind the sternum with a force he had not anticipated.
He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through it. Then he put the hand down and stood straight and waited for the dawn. Idrin and Sarah were already awake when the kitchen light came on. They had not slept either, he knew this, could read it in the quality of their movements as they came in and began the familiar mechanics of the morning. Nobody spoke about it. They had a last breakfast together at the kitchen table, all three of them, and the conversation was ordinary. The farm, the day's tasks that Idrin would handle differently now, a piece of local settlement news, ordinary and quiet and suffused, in every syllable, with the enormous thing none of them were naming. Kael ate. He tasted nothing. He watched his parents' faces with the total attention he had always brought to them, storing the specific quality of this morning, this table, this light. In the yard, in the cold purple pre-dawn, Sarah crouched in front of him. She held his face in both hands, those strong, warm, steady hands. She looked at him fully. Everything she was, looking at everything he was, in the cold morning light. Kael looked back at her and felt the full weight of the last 9 years arrive all at once, every morning, every lesson, every quiet evening, every time she had held him through something difficult, every conversation that had built him from nothing into whatever he currently was. He felt it like a physical force, concentrated in the palms of her hands against his face and the dark green of her eyes looking into his. He was not going to cry. He was absolutely not going to cry. His chin was doing something he could not fully control. Sarah's thumbs moved, barely perceptibly, against his jaw. Steadying him. Knowing him, as she always had, before he knew himself.
You listen more than you speak. You always have. Keep doing that. You learn more from listening. You are afraid of nothing, and that is your gift and your danger both. Learn the difference between courage and recklessness. Your life will depend on it.
She paused. Something moved across her face, a brief, controlled crossing of the thing she was carrying, and then it was contained again. But he had seen it. He would never forget that he had seen it.
We are always with you. Even when you cannot see us. We are always there.
Then she pulled him close. Hard and fierce, the way she did everything, completely, without reservation, holding nothing back. He pressed his face against her shoulder and gripped the back of her jacket with both fists and let himself, for exactly this long, feel the full size of what he was leaving. Her warmth. The specific solidity of her. The fact of her, irreplaceable, the most constant thing in his entire existence. He did not cry. He came so close that it cost him something he could not name. When she released him and stepped back, and when he saw, for just a fraction of a second before her composure locked into place, the expression on her face, he understood something about love that he had not understood before. That the cost of it is real and enormous, and that the people who love you most are the ones who pay that cost the most quietly, because they have decided, without discussing it, that their pain is not your burden to carry. He made a decision, right there in the farmyard, in the cold morning dark.
Thanks. I will be worth that cost. Whatever it requires. Whatever it takes. I will be worth what this woman is paying to stand here and let me go.
He walked with Idrin to the boundary. Just the two of them, in the cold silence, crunching across the frost-stiff ground. His bag on his back, the compass in his breast pocket. The jungle glow on the southern horizon, low and steady. The two moons, Vorn and Ash, still pale in the brightening sky. Every step was a thing he felt completely. He was storing all of it. The sound of his boots on the frozen ground. The cold in his lungs. His father's unhurried stride beside him, one last time. At the boundary, the exact line where the farm's cleared land ended and Duskara's wild world began, Idrin stopped. He set down Kael's bag and crouched to his level. Close. Kael had rarely been this close to his father's face, eye to eye. He had his father's jaw, he knew, he had been told this by people at the settlement. He had not understood it looking at a face from normal distance. Up close now, at this extraordinary proximity, he could see it. The same bone structure. The same set of the eyes. Whatever else Kael Raven was or would become, he was this man's son. He was made from this. Idrin's voice, when it came, was the roughest Kael had ever heard it.
I have given you everything I have. This farm, this life, I built it with everything in me. And I am giving you away from it because I love you more than I love it. Do you understand that?
Kael held his father's eyes.
Yes. He understood it. He understood it in the way you understand something that is so large and so true that understanding it changes you slightly. Something shifts, some door opens that cannot be closed. His father had built everything he had from nothing, with his hands, over 20 years, on a cold planet at the edge of a system nobody cared about. And he was choosing to send the most important thing he had ever made, the thing he had waited years for and loved most completely, away from all of it. For Kael's sake. Not for his own. Not for any return. Simply because it was right. Kael nodded. He trusted himself with only that.
You go out there and you become whatever it is you're supposed to become. You don't look back wondering if we needed you here. We are fine. We will always be fine.
His voice cracked on the last word. Barely. Almost imperceptibly. Kael heard it. Idrin gripped his shoulder, once, hard, the grip of a man saying what words cannot hold.
Make it mean something. Whatever you do out there, make it mean something.
He held Kael's gaze for one more moment. Brown eyes and green eyes. Father and son. The whole weight of 9 years and every morning and every lesson and every cold silence that had meant I see you and I am here and I am proud of what you are. Then he stood. He picked up Kael's bag and held it out. Kael took it. His hands were steady. He was holding them steady with everything he had. He looked at his father one last time. Idrin was standing straight, shoulders back, chin level, standing the way you stand when you have decided to hold yourself together because someone needs to see you standing. The bravest thing Kael had ever seen, and he had seen the jungle, and he had faced the Shade Stalker, and neither of those things came close to this. He turned. He walked toward the transport lights. With every step, he felt the thread between himself and the boundary line stretching thinner and tighter. The want to turn around was overwhelming. Physical. A pull in his chest, in the muscles of his neck, just once, just to see him one more time, just. He kept walking. Not because it wasn't hard. It was the hardest thing he had done in 9 years of living. But Idrin had stood up straight so that Kael could keep walking. And Kael would not waste that. He pressed his hand to his breast pocket, the compass there, his mother's warmth still in the metal, and he walked toward the lights. The transport lifted from Duskara's surface as the pale sun of the Velhari system climbed above the horizon. Kael sat in a small passenger bay with his bag on his lap and his hands folded on top of it. Around him, 2 other academy-bound students, older, from northern settlements, already talking to each other in the easy way of people who had met before, gave him one curious glance at his eyes and then left him alone, which was what he needed. He was too busy to make conversation. He was doing the most important work of the journey, watching his planet from the viewport as the transport climbed, pressing every image into permanent storage. The farm was visible for perhaps 40 seconds before the transport's angle changed, a small cleared patch in the jungle's vast expanse, the farmhouse a tiny structure, the access road a threat. He could not distinguish individuals. He looked anyway. He looked until it was gone. Then Duskara itself, growing smaller in the viewport as the transport climbed into orbit, the jungle's dark green canopy still visible from high altitude as a vast, continuous texture covering most of the planet's surface, broken by the settlement clearings like small scars in something enormous. The bruised purple of the atmosphere from above. The two moons in their positions. He pressed his palm flat against the cold viewport glass and watched his planet become a sphere. He had known, intellectually, that planets were spheres. He had known from the astronomical texts that this was what a planet looked like from space. Knowing it and seeing it were two entirely different things. There was something in seeing the whole of Duskara, the whole of everything he had ever been, contained in a single visible object, that rearranged something in him. The farm, the jungle, his mother, his father, 9 years of cold mornings and hard work and rooftop nights and the specific smell of Duskaran soil, all of it fitting inside that sphere, that small dark planet at the edge of the system, growing smaller. The transport reached orbital altitude and the engines changed pitch, orienting for the transit burn to the station that would connect them to the Academy's primary transfer vessel. The viewport no longer framed Duskara, it framed the wider system now, the pale sun further than he had ever been from it, the middle belt planets visible as points of light. Kael sat back. He breathed. He let the feeling of the last few hours settle into the place inside himself where he was storing it, the place that was his, that nothing external could reach. He reached into his pocket and held the compass. The needle swung gently, searching for something to orient by. Finding nothing definitive in the ship's metal. Settling to a slight tremble, still pointing, still trying, still doing the only thing a compass knows how to do. He thought about his mother's hands on his face. He thought about his father standing straight at the boundary line.
Thanks. I know where I stand.
The transit burn engaged. The stars in the viewport shifted. He was 9 years old and more frightened than he had ever been and more certain than he had ever been, and both things were, he was learning, exactly right. The right response to what was ahead of him. The appropriate equipment for whatever was coming. He looked at the stars through the viewport. Not the Duskara sky that he knew, a new configuration, a new angle on the same infinite dark. The longing was still there. The ache. The sense of something calling from out in that darkness. But it was different now. It had direction. It had a beginning and a destination. It was no longer a hollow wanting without object. It was a heading. He looked at the stars for a long time, in the hum of the transport, as Duskara disappeared behind them. Then, for the first time in 24 hours, he slept. They will ask, one day, where it began. Now you know. It began with a man who built a farmhouse beam by beam on a cold, dark planet nobody cared about, because he had decided that something built by hand from nothing was worth more than anything handed to you from comfort. It began with a woman who stood still in the face of things that would have moved anyone else, and taught her son that stillness was not the absence of feeling but the mastery of it. It began with a boy on a rooftop, in the cold, looking at a sky that was calling him somewhere he couldn't name. It began in the jungle, when something ancient and wild and dangerous looked at a child and, for reasons neither the child nor the creature could have explained, chose to step back. It began at a boundary line, between a father and a son, in the particular bravery of a man choosing to stand straight so that someone he loved could keep walking. Kael Raven did not become who he became at the Academy. He did not become it in battle or in victory or in any of the extraordinary moments that the history files would record. He became it on Duskara, in the cold, in the work, in the love of two people who had nothing and gave everything. The Academy would train what Duskara had made.
The universe would eventually encounter what the Academy produced.
It was not ready. Remember to subscribe. Next, Story 2, The Academy, New World. New rules. New enemies.
Calls his name. Kael Raven. stayed bruised and dark on a farm at the edge of the stars, where the jungle breathed with a violet glow and the nights left frost like scars.
Black hair falling like the shadow trees, green eyes burning like storm-lit flame. A child of soil, of blood, of sacrifice, and the universe whispered his name.
He learned from the cold,
He learned from the land,
from his father's silence,
from his mother's steady hand.
and when the heavens called, he felt it in his bones. A boy from Duskara, born to walk alone. Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black-haired son of a dying sun.
Raised where the wild things never showed mercy,
Forged where only the strongest run. Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
with the stars burning deep in his soul,
he will rise from the dark of Duskara
and change the universe whole.
He could read the land like an ancient map, see the roots where the jungle crept, remember every word, every star, every wound, every promise his young heart kept.
He moved before fear could chain his feet, fast as lightning, calm as stone. When the shade stalker came from the canopy black, he stood before it alone.
No sword in his hand,
No army behind,
only courage alive.
in a dangerous mind,
Then a sound rose low,
from a place unknown,
and the beast stepped back.
from the boy half grown.
Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black-haired son of a dying sun.
Raised where the wild things never showed mercy, forged where only the strongest run.
Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
With the stars burning deep in his soul,
he will rise from the dark of Duskara
and change the universe whole.
He sees the pattern in the chaos. He hears the silence speak. He finds the road through broken stars, where others only see defeat.
He carries a compass close to his heart, a memory no distance can break. His mother's words, his father's strength, the price of love he must not waste.
From black soil,
Cold rain,
from cold rain,
green light,
from green lightning,
from deep pain.
from deep pain. From the rooftop where the stars called out, from the boundary where he walked away, from the jungle where fear met courage, Kael Raven found his way.
Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black-haired son of a dying sun. Raised where the wild things never showed mercy, forged where only the strongest run.
Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
With the stars burning deep in his soul,
he was his name. Kael Raven. The sky stayed bruised and dark on a farm at the edge of the stars, where the jungle breathed with a violet glow and the nights left frost like scars.
Black hair falling like the shadow trees, green eyes burning like storm-lit flame. A child of soil, of blood, of sacrifice, and the universe whispered his name.
He learned from the cold,
He learned from the land,
from his father's silence,
from his mother's steady hand.
and when the heavens called, he felt it in his bones. A boy from Duskara, born to walk alone. Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black-haired son of a dying sun.
Raised where the wild things never showed mercy,
Forged where only the strongest run. Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
with the stars burning deep in his soul,
he will rise from the dark of Duskara
and change the universe whole.
He could read the land like an ancient map, see the roots where the jungle crept, remember every word, every star, every wound, every promise his young heart kept.
He moved before fear could chain his feet, fast as lightning, calm as stone. When the shade stalker came from the canopy black, he stood before it alone.
No sword in his hand,
No army behind,
only courage alive.
in a dangerous mind,
Then a sound rose low,
from a place unknown,
and the beast stepped back.
from the boy half grown.
Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black-haired son of a dying sun.
Raised where the wild things never showed mercy, forged where only the strongest run.
Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
With the stars burning deep in his soul,
he will rise from the dark of Duskara
and change the universe whole.
He sees the pattern in the chaos. He hears the silence speak. He finds the road through broken stars, where others only see defeat.
He carries a compass close to his heart, a memory no distance can break. His mother's words, his father's strength, the price of love he must not waste.
From black soil,
Cold rain,
from cold rain,
green light,
from green lightning,
from deep pain.
from deep pain. From the rooftop where the stars called out, from the boundary where he walked away, from the jungle where fear met courage, Kael Raven found his way. Kael Raven, eyes of green fire, black hair, son of a dying sun.
Raised where the wild things never showed mercy, forged where only the strongest run.
Kael Raven, storm-born dreamer,
With the stars burning deep in his soul,
he will rise from the dark of Duskara
and change the universe whole.
The academy may train him, but Duskara made his name.
Kael Raven,
two pale moons, where the cold wind calls his name, Kael Raven. The sky stayed bruised and dark on a farm at the edge of the stars, where the jungle breathed with a violet glow and the nights left frost like scars.
Black hair falling like the shadow trees, green eyes burning like storm-lit flame. A child of soil, of blood, of sacrifice, and the universe whispered his name.
He learned from the cold,
He learned from the land,
from his father's silence,
from his mother's steady hand.
and when the heavens called, he felt it in his bones. A boy from Duskara.